Okay, we have recorded. Amazing. Okay, so hopefully, if you've clicked on the document, you're there already. I'm going to share my screen now so that those of you who find that a little bit difficult will be able to see. Oh, amazing. I can see some of your little animals on the top to show that you're there. Fantastic. Okay, so this is our source sheet for today. I want to be going through some sources in Tanakh about the creation of man and woman. And I want to then look at a story in the Gemara that kind of problematizes the creation of man and woman in particular. And hopefully by doing this, we're going to be seeing a way that the rabbis of the Talmud saw marriage, but not just marriage, but really just connection between two people in an intimate and close way. And we're going to be seeing that something that could seem like a pedantic disagreement, halachic fight that's happening in the Gemara is actually a larger microcosm for this larger philosophical discussion about what it means to really connect with someone. And I think that hopefully by seeing this, first we'll look at the Tanakh sources that we'll be familiar with, that we'll see in the Parsha later this week. But then we'll go to the Gemara and we will see how this fight comes about. And then hopefully we'll see how different opinions in the Gemara are showing different ways of understanding the nature of a relationship. And then hopefully we'll have a nice tie-in together. And I hope that other people will be able to participate. Some people will be able to speak about marriage probably more aptly than I will. And hopefully your voices will get to be vocalized. Okay, so first part of the source sheet is the Tanakh sources. We have two sources from the Tanakh. We have Genesis 1, which is going to be the story of the creation, the story that some of us read on Simchat Torah earlier this week, that we'll be reading later on this week, is the first version of the creation story that's in the Torah. This is the one that is, there were 6 days of creation. On the first day, God created the world. There was light and darkness. Next day, there was water. Next day, there was plantations. Then fourth was sun, moon, and stars. Fifth day was reptiles. And then sixth day were mammals, animals that crawled on the earth, and then human beings. And that's where we're going to be reading from today. So I'm going to read that first source for us quickly. And I want us to be focusing on, in particular, verses 26 to 27, because that's really about human beings. I'm going to read in English for the sake of simplicity. If you know the Hebrew and you feel like you have comments about the Hebrew, feel free to share when we have comments. Okay, so this is the beginning of the 6th day. Starting at verse 24. God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. Okay, it's day number 6. God now commanded for there to be living creatures. Verse 25, God made wild beasts of every kind and cattle of every kind and all kinds of creeping things on the earth. And God saw that this was good. Great, more creations. Saying that God made it good. That's the common end phrase that's given throughout the story of creation to show that God approves of what was going on and what God has created. Okay, now verse 26 is where the stuff starts getting interesting for us. And God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth." Okay, so God says to create God after our image. There's a whole separate discussion in Midrashim about what does it mean to be created in our image, God in the plural. That could be a whole shir in and of itself. But we're going to be focusing on God just saying we're creating humankind, and that they're going to be able to rule over the earth. Then we have verse 27. And God created humankind in the divine image, creating an image of God, creating them male and female. Okay, we're going to hold on to that too. Well, interesting how the aspects of male and female come up here. 28, God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep the earth." God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, and they shall be yours for food. And all the animals, and to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is breath of life, all the green plants for food." And it was so. And God saw all that had been made and found it very good. And it was evening, there was morning, the 6th day. Okay, so we rushed through that a little bit, but ultimately I wanted to provide a large scope to provide context for how human beings were created. It wasn't that we were created first. It wasn't that we were created to be, you'd think maybe like if we were created first, I would say something about our importance. It is true that we are told to take control over the earth. But we're not actually the first one to get created on that day. I think that's very interesting. And we're kind of just like plopped in the middle, and there's all of these points about men and women being created in our image are just kind of thrown out there. And so I thought it'd be important to kind of see that in that range here. So there's that. However, and then I'm going to show you the contrasting story, and then hopefully we can open up for discussion a little bit. Then in Genesis 5, and these texts are going to become important for this debate in the Gemara and the oral Talmud coming up, we have yet another iteration of the creation of man. And the only aspects that it talks about is talking about here in verse number 1, number 2, this is the record of Adam's line. Now, we're not even talking about the creation of humankind. We're talking about Adam in particular. When God created humankind, it was made in the likeness of God. Male and female, they were created. And when they were created, God blessed them and called them humankind. So I like for you to be able to sit with these texts maybe for a moment. And I'd love to hear if you notice any similarities between Genesis 1 and Genesis 5. You see any differences? And what do you think the significance of certain details that are in each story are? What do you think they might tell us about the nature of humankind according to what God would desire based off of these narratives? And if you want to share, feel free to use the hand raising function on your Zoom, or we can try and just, you can speak out. We could see what happens. Yes, Barry.
Hi, welcome. It's nice to meet you even on Zoom. I read 5 books, each one. So I read Bereshit separate from the other 4, and I go along. My book, my Chumash is linear English translation, Rashi commentary. So I have the benefit of having read Rashi's commentary. I don't read the other commentators because I don't have them handy. But so I read these, and I noticed that the creation, aside from the differences between the creating of Adam and Eve, there's also creating us in God's image, which seems to be an ability to reason and discern, and that we have intellect, we have capability of thinking, reasoning, discerning. Evidently, we don't have knowledge of good and evil yet, but we do know how to discern and reason things. So, and then of course there are differences definitely between Genesis 1 and Genesis 5 regarding the creation of Eve, and then there's the hesitation on Rashi's part, or the recognition that man is capable of ruling the earth, but if we don't get a grip on it, the beasts can rule us. Mm-hmm. So we see that too, I think, and by reading Rashi's commentary itself. I'm so excited to wrap my head around what you're going to do here with the Talmud. This is going to be a great educational study for me. So,
okay, thank you.
I noticed those things, and there's so much. You said it could be a share of its own, and it can, or more. So I'm anxious to see what you have to say.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Barry. That was really great. Rashi is a great place to start when we're thinking about other commentaries, and your own insights are also really helpful. Yeah, I think there are so many great points that you brought up. One is like the role of Eve in both of these, right? Like it does say that man and woman were both created in both of them, but in the first, there's no mention of who that man is. And then already here in the fifth one, we have Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. We're talking about Adam. And that seems to be the way we're like understanding humanity. And we're thinking about it generationally. I didn't even read the third line, but they jump all the way like after that. So it's already talking about Adam's son, Seth, who continues the human line. So like there's much more of a desire to be focusing on human lineage and family that way. That's like definitely not there in the first version. There's also the environmental aspect, right? Like it's clear in the first one that like we're supposed to take in charge of the land, and that's totally lacking in the fifth one. So yeah, I think you bring up a lot of interesting points. Does anyone else want to share before we move on?
Hi. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi, how are you? So
Hi.
I I just wanted to mention what I thought about the first verse. When God created humankind, it was made in the likeness of God. And then it says in the third verse, when Adam had begot his son, he begot son in his likeness. I think there is a similarity between those two verses of how God created humankind and how Adam created in his likeness, and then how Adam had a son in his likeness.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it that way. Right. That the creation of being created in the image of God, that the same terminology is used in the 5th chapter to describe Adam and then his son. That's very interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Right. So these are just like a few examples. There's so many more we could have, but I want to get to the Talmud text. So we're going to move on. But I think that we can all agree that although this is an iteration of the same creation story, there's like different perspectives that are coming with Genesis 1 and Genesis 5. So now we might think, okay, like that's nice. We read the news and we see that sometimes one event happens and multiple newspapers have different things to say about it. That could be just what it is. But we're actually going to see that the difference of opinion affects how a debate in the Talmud occurs. So we're going to move on to that. So now we're going to go to Gemara sources on the source sheet. I have it here. So in the Masechet Ketubot, this is the tractate that people are reading if they're doing Daf Yomi, if they're reading a page of Talmud every day. Lots of discussions about marriages and contracts. And so there's a discussion about Sheva Brachot, which are the blessings that one says under marriage canopy, also said for the first 7 days of a marriage, to really kind of like make happy the situation. And there is a Talmudic debate regarding the nature of those blessings. And that's what we're going to read about now. So in Masechet Ketubot, it says, the Gemara relates, Levi happened to come to the house of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi during the wedding celebration of Rabbi Shimon, his son, and recited 5 of these blessings. Rav Asi happened to come to the house of Rav Ashi during the wedding celebration of Mar, his son, and recited 6 of these blessings. So we could say, all right, this is an interesting pedantic story that the Gemara is sharing with us. But there seems to be like a deep philosophical difference regarding the nature of Sheva Brachot, which literally means 7 blessings, right, in the Hebrew, about how many blessings they're supposed to say. So it could just be, that they had difference of opinions, but this is of extreme weight. Saying blessings in the Talmud is no laughing matter. It's very serious, invoking God's name. And so deciding to have one extra one or leaving out one is really serious. And so there must be a lot of thought behind it. And that's what we're going to explore now. It might be a little bit confusing with the numbers as well. We just said, wait a minute, there's 7 blessings, and now we're debating between 5 or 6. The reason why that's the case is that the blessing that is number 7 doesn't usually get counted because it's the one that you bless on the wine. It's the least interesting. It's the least exciting because we're used to hearing that on Shabbat night and other times when we have holidays. But the focus is on the other blessings that we'll see. So the question could be then, well, which blessings are they debating about? What is the one that might be getting left out, or 2 that are being combined, that there's 5 versus 6? And so that's what we have here. If you continue into Masechet Ketubot, it lists all of the Sheva Brachot. I don't know how to sing all of them. Maybe some of you here do, that might be familiar from being at weddings. But the 2 that are in question that are listed here are 1, Yotzer Ha'adam. So, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam Yotzer Ha'adam. Blessed are you, God, ruler of the universe, who is the creator of mankind. That is blessing. That is Yotzer Ha'adam blessing. And the second blessing is Asher Yatzar et Adam Betzalmo, Betzalm Demut Tam Bito, V'yitkin lo mimenu binyan adayad, Baruch atah Hashem Yotzer Ha'adam. So the third blessing is, blessed are you, God, who made humanity in God's image, in the image of the likeness of God's form, and out of God's very self formed a building for eternity. Blessed are you, Lord, creator of mankind. So before we even get to the debate, I'm curious how people feel about these being the blessings that we say at a wedding. I don't often think about what we're saying. Like, it's usually a very emotional time. You're very excited for whoever is under the wedding canopy. And this is what we're saying. I'm curious if people have any reactions, thoughts to this. Yeah, Chaya. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, sorry, just getting the camera and microphone together. Hi.
No worries.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and like I have more questions than answers, but I wonder, like, this makes me think of like there's something like existential going on. Sorry, which I don't know if it can come from sort of if you think of marriage as being about like human continuity, which makes you like reflect on humanity as like a project, which I think is really interesting. I think there's like nicer ways that you can also spin it, which you could, if you think that there's something fundamental going on at a wedding, that's like fundamental to what humanity is for, which like I don't know if it's too, I'm always skeptical if things are too nice sounding, but I do think there might be something to be said if you think humanity exists in order to, like there's a lot of ways to spin it, but like one way that I'm going to suggest is like if the idea is to sorry, I don't want to make like two grand statements. If human relationships are a big part of being human and the point of being human, and if you think that your ultimate like sort of building of yourself as a person in relationship, you might think that like the marriage relationship is the one where that is maybe tested the most and the most like acutely developed as like developing yourself as a relational being. Then like I actually think it's kind of awesome to stand under a chuppah and be like, this is what humanity is about. It's about love. I don't know if that sounds too Christian, or it's about something.
No,
I
very-
think like again, this is like sort of my
Very sad.
ruminations and there's not really like clear thesis, but I do think it's really interesting to stand under, yeah, to think like at a wedding and be like what are we doing here? It's very existential and I think it's really cool. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, thank you. Hi, that was great. I think you're bringing up a lot of points. Like we could go down the route of like, oh my gosh, it's all about like having kids and continuing that, or we could say like there's something like really fundamentally beautiful about like finding connection, and there's also something like godly about like what that consummation can be. That I think Toby was mentioning that, like saying that the creation of like of Adam and then Seth, that like that is something that is created in the image, like using that terminology. Yeah, I think there's something there. Barry, did you want to say something else?
I do. Hi, are you done? Have you?
Yeah, go for it.
You're good? Okay.
Yes.
It seems to me, I made a mistake before I became interested in studying Torah, that I studied American law. So I tend to take profound documents as saying what they're supposed to say and not saying what they don't need to say. And the authors saying what they want to say and not saying what they don't want to say. What that now means is back to Bereshit, the first and one commandment that human beings get, as well as the copulating creatures that are created, is pru or vu. That's the one command we get, and that's and we are created with our seeds to be with us, much like the trees they have their seeds for themselves. Humankind has the seeds that it needs to make itself, and we keep going, and it's pru or vu. It's not till we get to Torah later, when we get to after giving the Torah, that we get some laws like kibud av v'em and love your brother as yourself, things like that. So we start to get the the generic interrelationship between people and certain kinds of people. But the first two people created were the different sexes and the command to pru or vu. So I think right now at this stage, that's where I am. That's where I'm thinking that I'm seeing. And so I'm looking at these brachot in that sense, and that these things are for to bless the creation of the purpose of that they're being there, the wedding, the combination of the people for this purpose. And that's what we're seeing. God created Adam and Eve, mankind, at that point, and now we're that current set, and we are the inheritors of pru or vu, and that's where we are now, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. I will say, I'll speak for myself, like as someone who has not yet had children, like I say, hold on to, if that's turning you off, hold on, that's not necessarily where we're going to be going with this. But I do think that that is like how we might be seeing the text so far. A different question I would ask before we move on is, what do we think the difference is between these two blessings? Like, they're both about creation of humanity, but there seems to be something different about them enough that there's a shift in how many blessings we're saying. That's part of that story, going all the way back to the Gemara. Does anyone feel like they see any differences? Or maybe they're repetitive?
Not enough information.
That these blessings, that Yotzer Ha'adam, the creation of man, and then that we are blessing God, we're thanking God for creating humanity in God's image. They're both about the creation of humanity. And so the question is, like, why should we even be having two different blessings to begin with about those things? Like, they're very similar. And I'm curious if people notice anything significant about that here, if there's any differences between these two blessings.
Can I throw in a point on that? The two brachot, the bracha where we're blessing God is the same in both cases. It's both Yotzer Ha'adam. And so the stuff that comes before, I'm not sure if that's part of the bracha or if it's what I've learned to call dicta, if it's background, if it's whereas, or underlying things. But the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, ends in Yotzer Ha'adam, and in both cases.
Right, exactly. They both end with Yotzer Ha'adam.
That's where we're blessing.
Right, yeah. One has more background, that's totally right. And the other one is just the end again. So we could say, all right, maybe what they're debating, these rabbis were saying 5 versus 6 blessings, is it worth the repetition, right? We say Yotzer Ha'adam once, that's great. Why do we need to say it again? And that might be what's going on here. Now, the rabbi that says 5 blessings is saying there's no need to say 2. Let's just say 1. We have now fulfilled the obligation of saying that God created mankind. And the other one is saying, no, the background that is really necessary for that additional one, or maybe there's something else going on there. And that is where I want to go next.
Let's go.
Okay. So now we are continuing in the Gemara. And the Gemara is trying to figure out why there is this debate of 5 versus 6. And so it says, the Gemara suggests, let us say that they disagree about this. One sage holds it was 1 act of creation in which man was created. And one sage holds it was 2 acts of creation in which man was created. Okay, so let's take a step back. Now we have to put on our math hats. I actually wrote out a little bit of a cheat sheet for us on the bottom about what the 2 opinions are. The first opinion is that there was 1 act of creation regarding the creation of humanity. Adam and Eve were created at the same time, but not just at the same time, as one being. So there is a midrash, maybe you've heard of it, the idea that the first person on earth was both Adam and Eve together as one. And then the front and the back were both of them. And then at some point they get split. But that's not an act of creation that getting split. That's just they got split. But ultimately there was 1 act of creation regarding humanity, and it was Adam and Eve in one being. Opinion number 2 is that there were 2 acts of creation. First there was Adam, and then there was Eve. And so what they seem to be saying is that the debate between 5 versus 6 blessings of saying Yotzer Ha'adam once versus saying Yotzer Ha'adam twice is about the idea of, was there creation of humanity once, or was there creation of humanity twice? Was there one being, i.e. Adam and Eve together, therefore we only need 1 Yotzer Ha'adam? Or was it 2, that there was Adam and then Eve, and therefore you should have 2 blessings of Yotzer Ha'adam to represent that difference? So that actually, I wouldn't have necessarily read that into the debate. I think it's interesting that's what the rabbis think is going on. I think a lot of other points that we were bringing up about the existential aspect of what does it mean to be under the wedding chuppah, or what does it mean to have this background, right, for why the creation of humanity. I see that much quicker, but this is what the rabbis seem to be seeing as the debate. So when you have one rabbi come in saying 5 blessings and the other one coming in saying 6, they're debating on what the nature of creation was. Was it that Adam and Eve were one being that then split, or was it Adam and Eve as 2 separate beings? Okay, and in case you were worried that our texts that we cited all the way back to the beginning were not going to be relevant, here they are, and they're back again. There's a rejection of that understanding. And also for those of you who are a little bit scared about the Gemara logic, that is okay. And this is the last section of Gemara we're going to be learning today. And then we're going to sit back and think about what's the greater takeaway of all of this. So I recommend you hang tight if it's a little bit scary. Okay, The Gemara rejects that suggestion. No, everyone agrees that it was only one act of creation. So according to this understanding, the Gemara, no, everyone agrees that Adam and Eve were one being created at the same time. However, one sage holds it is according to the initial thought that we proceed, and one sage holds it is according to the action that we proceed. Okay, we're not sure what that means. So now we have to read the next part that's going to explain and then uses our verses. Like how Rabbi Yehuda raises a contradiction. In one verse it is written, and God created man in his own image, indicating one act of creation. And in another verse it is written, male and female he created them, indicating two acts. How can this apparent contradiction be resolved? Initially, the thought entered God's mind to create two, but ultimately only one was actually created. Okay, so there's a lot of rabbinic exegesis, a lot of rabbinic interpretation happening in these verses that maybe we would not have noticed right away when we were reading it on our own. What Rabbi Yehuda is pointing out is that in our first story in Genesis 1, the beginning of the verse says, God created man in God's own image, which sounds like one being. But then in the next one, male and female, he created them. That sounds like two, male and female. And so the idea is that initially the question was there going to be a creation of one being, of Adam and Eve, that were together versus two separate ones? How do we reconcile this? He says those are contradictory. Rabbi Yehuda is saying like there can only be one answer to this, that initially God was hoping to create two beings, but in the end, God created one. Okay, so there's a lot there. Here's the cheat sheet again, if you need it. The debate seems to be a question about the nature of Genesis 1 and Genesis 5 and what they're coming to teach us. Genesis 1 is saying that God creates man in seemingly two acts. God says, maybe I was going to create Adam and Eve in separate ways, but actually I'm going to create them as one. And then in Genesis 5, there's no like debate in God's head. It's like, no, God created it. God created Adam and Eve together, and that's that. So even the idea that God is debating and like changing God's mind about the nature of how to create things is interesting, and that gets preserved. That's how Rabbi Yehuda solves this contradiction in the text. I find that to be a bit complicated, but once again, we can be seeing that this is like something that could seem pedantic, but is actually a larger question of what's the ideal of human relationship and human connection? Is that they're supposed to be created separately or created together? And this could be just about Adam and Eve, or it could be also the nature of how we relate to each other. Is it better in relationships to be acting as a codependent pair, not even seeing them as a pair, but seeing them as almost one being? Or is it better for them to be separate entities? But when is it too far that they're separate entities? That seems to be the struggle and the back and forth that these rabbis are dealing with. Like, as much as we can get lost in the weeds through all of this, they're all ultimately trying to figure out, what does it mean to be in relationship with another person, and how much do I become subsumed in that relationship? How much can I maintain my own identity in that relationship? And that's what they seem to be using these texts for. Now I want to take the time for comments, questions. Questions can be clarification. These are really difficult texts. These can be comments about how you feel the nature of these relationships work. They can be about marriage, but I also don't think they necessarily have to be about marriage. They can be about any kind of intimacies that we have with people in our lives, close friends, family. And I'm curious what people have to say about that. And maybe if there's an opinion that sticks out to them more as being resonant, some that they find really problematic, I'd love to hear. Yeah, Barry, go for it.
I find that along the way, sometimes when I express my thoughts, my insights, my questions, my confusions, I love to hear other people, so I'll hesitate in saying something, but at this point now I have to. I think that God has all facets within God, and yet God creates an interrelationship, certainly for Pru Urvu, which is still the first interpersonal commandment on the table, and makes us interdependent with each other. We're not able, neither one of us, neither male nor female, can make a child without the other, without something from the other, even in today's modern technology, right? We still need something. So it's God is putting us together for purposes that we get to help fashion. Pretty sure God has something in mind, but we get to fashion it. So here it is, marriage up front. Whether you buy the idea that Adam named all the creatures and came to the end and realized that he was the one without a mate. So God creates his helpmate from him, helpmeet, whatever. Or each of us has the side of the gender that's not our own. So if I'm male, I have a feminine side. You have and women have masculine sides. For understanding, for insight, for bonding, we get along for at least sympathy, if not empathy. So there's all these things. There's a total confusion on my part as to how this was created, but it seems clear to me that it was created with the intent on setting us into the motion of learning to deal with each other and learning to, excuse the expression for the want of a better one than my head, to make creation a better place, to actually put into action the concept that creation was in God's mind when God went about doing these acts. And I love that the rabbis, the sages, recognize that I'm looking at this intent, I'm looking at this act. It's hard to separate the two to make a real world. They both have a place, but you got to have both. To stumble
Thank
through the
you.
world without an intent leads to a lot of folly, in my opinion, and to fail to act in good ways and to do good things is also not living fully.
Yes. Thank you. I think that's really helpful. And it is, I think it's helpful to think like the rabbis weren't just like sitting there trying to pontificate for fun. Like there really were some important debates about the nature of humanity, like why we're here. So
That's why they're the sages.
Yeah, exactly. Ruth Littman, I saw that you were raising your hand.
So one thing that comes to my mind is that God had a hand in creating both male and female, no matter whether it was one creation or two. And so I think it speaks to men and women both having value of being, created by God. So I think, especially when we're dealing with issues of patriarchy, it kind of takes it back to, well, we were both created by God and we're both, on equal footing at least, at that point. And I think that's a good thing to take forward.
Right. Like the debate is never was women out of the picture. It was always like, was she created afterward? Or was she created at the same time? Like she's always there. And I think that's a really good point to remember. Thank you.
I think so.
Lana, were you raising your hand? No pressure. If you
I don't know. I'm confused a little bit about this, and
Yeah.
I find it confusing. I mean, it's very interesting. Are we, do we fit together as one? Are we separate? Are we, what is our purpose on earth? I hope that it's not just to procreate, because that seems, I've been thinking a lot about it through the Chagim, just because there's so much, your mom gave me a whole pamphlet that she developed on barrenness. And I was thinking, there's so much emphasis on having children. And I'm just wondering, if we don't have some kind of a greater purpose than to just bear children. And then what of people who can't?
Right.
Or what happens to people who don't find a partner? Like, what does this mean? In the end, God answers Sarah's prayers and gives her a son. Is that the thing that gave her meaning in this world? Wasn't there some bigger purpose? Like, she had done so much before she had Yitzchak. She really did. She came a very long way. She went on that journey with Avraham. I don't know. I'm finding this all problematic and troublesome because I don't like to think that we're driven by our chromosomes and what we're supposed to be doing is having children all day long. I think that's worrisome and kind of diminishes our, like, what do we need to do anything else for? Like, this is, I mean, I understand, this is the first commandment, we have to, be fruitful and multiply, but I don't know. I'd love to know where we're going with this, because maybe you've got like you've got me now. I really want to hear something that's, going to tell me that we're more than just, our procreation.
Yes, I think that it's important for us to be remembering that the nature of this shiur in particular is that we're looking at a source that's debating these verses from the Parsha, but it's taking them out of context, and it's specifically looking at them in the context of marriage. So this isn't how we have to look at the story. This is like one tool in the toolbox, right? There's a lot of different things we can get out of the story, and marriage and procreation does not have to be our main takeaway. I know for myself as a single young woman, like, that would not be the ideal takeaway for me. That wouldn't be very practical for my life at the moment. So I think that that's important to remember. I do think it is, like, also, you could say, like, kind of sad and depressing to think like that we're merely animalistic. It's just about like us being in survival mode. So I don't want to be looking at it like that. I agree with you that can feel hard, and the Chagim especially are a really hard time to be thinking about that, whether it be the Torah portions we're reading or seeing just a lot of kids around in shul. So I think it's very important to flag all of that. And I thank you for doing that again. I think it's like important for us to be holding that. I think that what I would say ultimately to respond to is that I still think that the nature of this discussion can still be about, even if this isn't like the most traditional sense, like to be thinking about what does it mean to have different kinds of intimacies with different people. Like, I think that nowadays in the modern world that we live in, we often associate intimacies with romantic love. But I think throughout history, intimacy has been about creation of community structures, of family structures, friendship. It doesn't have to necessarily lead to marriage. I think that it's important for us to be intentional about all kinds of connections we make with people. And I think that it comes up a lot in friendships and in families and in communities about how the struggle of personhood. Am I this, are me and my community the same being, but just different sides of people's heads? Or are we different beings? And then how are we supposed to relate to each other? Like, I think that this discussion can map onto any kind of relationship, even though it is still like very much like heavily drenched in heterosexual marriage here. But I think that these terms of connection can apply in a lot of other ways. And so that's how I'm viewing it. And I think that like everyone would do better for thinking about like, how do we relate to lots of different kinds of people in our lives in meaningful ways. I think a lot of people would be happier. I don't know if that counts as like an apologetic answer, Lana. So I apologize if that is. I will say also, like, this is not going to be the theme of every single class by a long shot. And also not every single class is going to be particularly halacha heavy. So there will always be a range. It's more about like this exercise of what do we do when there's a Talmudic discussion and when they bring in Torah sources, like how do we then see the Torah in a whole new light and have something else to discuss at the Shabbat table. And even if there's, disagreement, like this is also an important discussion to be having and disagreeing with. Like, I think that this leads to a lot of fruitful conversations, even if it is like something more on like the disagreement side. So hopefully that's the spirit that we can like all be taking this in. Ruth, not Ruth Littman. Would you like to say something?
The other Ruth, yes. So I'd had one thought, and then this whole wonderful conversation that just happened over the past 5 minutes also made me think of a lot of other stuff. So I apologize in advance for the stream of consciousness as I like reform what I was initially thinking. My initial thought was that I always really loved and just kind of connected with the idea of Hashem creating both Adam and Chava at the same time, and them being one being, and then them being separated. You know, that your Besheret is that other half. And what I was just kind of thinking before, again, this conversation, and I'll talk about in just a sec how that kind of made me also expand what I was already thinking about, was that, we're told that we're made in Hashem's image. So what does that mean when we find, our other life partner and we join with them? We're gifted the ability to create and to make new life, which is such a quintessential godlike power almost. So just that idea that we're made in God's image, and that the way that is shown so strongly when you do come together, if you do choose to make a family, and that being, what it equals to be in God's image. That was really making me think. But then Lana, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, also made me think though, and Sophia, you mentioned this as well, about the other relationships that we have in our lives. And it really made me think, maybe, yes, that relationship between a man and a woman and being able to create life is one way to exercise that godlike ability. But it feels like at any sort of, interpersonal human connection is creating something and bringing something into this world. And maybe it's not as concrete as a human baby, but it's still creating something. And I don't know. I'm again thinking about this as I talk, but just that idea of interpersonal connections being what it means to be made in God's image is when we come together with other people.
Yeah, I think also another point that I was thinking about in light of this is this is the text that we have in the Tanakh, but there are other examples in the Talmud where there's discussions about how a student should relate to a teacher is similar to how a child should relate to a parent, like already within the Gemara before 21st century, and different awarenesses that we've gained like in this time period. There's already, I'm just gonna make it a little bigger. Okay, great. There's already a different understanding of like there are other ways to have connections and to see creation, right? Like the nature of like a teacher-student relationship, like different paradigms that exist out there that don't have to strictly be in this way. Murray Urwitz, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, it's
This is
it's-
my Saba. Everyone should know.
right. I was saying,
But yeah.
Oh, welcome. Merhaba.
Thank you very much. I have a feeling that we're jumping too far ahead here. This is a compilation of creation, and we're grouped in with animals and sun and light, etc., etc. We're done twice as man, woman, and as man and woman. Maybe that's a sign of importance. And I think the rabbis, they're just trying to rationalize whether the man, woman, or the man and woman are the same thing or not. And I think that's all that we should do here. What man and woman will do in the future, whether that's rule over the earth, or how they rule over the earth, etc., that's later. I think all we're doing here is saying, yes, humankind was created, and humankind is so important. They're said twice. And that's why one rabbi says, let's do both of these Neshama Brachos. They're either created as one or two individuals. And let's get on with the story later. This is just finishing the human part of creation.
Right. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that rabbis and Talmudic thinkers get lost in the details. So maybe that's the nature of the site. But yes, I think that not that this debate that they're having here about the 5 versus 6 blessings go all the way back to the original discussion in the Gemara. They weren't necessarily thinking about those ramifications that we've all been discussing. And maybe it's important to be able to think a few steps ahead sometimes. I think that like sometimes certain faux pas that rabbis do nowadays is not thinking exactly about what they're saying to certain contexts of people. But I think that probably in the time frame which they're living in, like that the debate that they're having isn't thinking as far steps ahead as we are. Yet again, they're still having like these meta discussions by having these like these pedantic halachic discussions. So I think that both of those are true. Okay, great. I wanted there to be lots of discussion. Let's go to the takeaway where hopefully we'll be able to like wrap some bows on some things where I want to kind of more put in a binary just for the sake of understanding like the two options that we have here about these different opinions about the nature of creation based off of the understanding of these combinations of brachot versus separation based off of reading Genesis 1 versus Genesis 5 together. is the nature of marriage or connection, is it about a sense of cleaving, or is it about a sense of independence? So the text I have here, since we're talking about patriarchy, is a text that some of us here might be familiar with. This is like one of the main sources for why women should be subjected to or subjects to men. But the text here explicitly says at the end of the story, when Adam and Eve are banished from the garden, are being punishment. The punishment is about having hard labor, and it says the translation that was here as far as "yet your urge shall be for your husband," but really what it means that you're going to have to cleave to your husband. And so here the idea is that the punishment is that woman will not be able to be independent, and that she will have to be dependent or connected to man. It's interesting that that's a punishment, as opposed to like the nature of what relationships are. And also we could have have a whole share on like, is that true now? I think a lot of us here in the Zoom call would like suggest otherwise and say that that was probably something of the past, or something that like we can work past and transcend. But that seems to be one option for how relationships could work, is that it's about cleaving. And in times of desperation and difficulty, it's very helpful and nice to be able to really rely on someone that way. But as we've seen how the nature of this verse has been expanded upon throughout the centuries to harm women, to say that they cannot be independent, like that is like one real consequence of the danger of cleaving, but also nature of like clinginess. I feel like that's like what modern people would say about like when relationships are close, and that like that there's a sense of attachment that could potentially be unhealthy. Or is it about a sense of independence? And I thought the way that I would kind of illustrate that is illustrate a section of writing that I particularly like by Rainer Maria Rilke, who was a German poet in the late, I would say 19th and early 20th century. And the way that he describes marriage, I think, is the way that maybe we're kind of debating about what the nature of relationship and connection is. So I'm going to read us off with that, and hopefully we'll round us off there. And if people have more comments, we'll be able to go for it. Okay, so he says, the point of marriage, or for us also just any type of connection, deep connection, is not to create a quick commonality by tearing down all boundaries. On the contrary, a good marriage or connection is one in which each partner appoints the other to be the guardian of his or her solitude, and thus they show each other the greatest possible trust. A merging of two people is an impossibility, and where it seems to exist, it is a hemming in, a mutual consent that robs one party or both parties of their fullest freedom and development. But once the realization is accepted that even between the closest people infinite distances exist, a marvelous living side by side can grow up for them, if they succeed in loving the expanse between them, which gives them the possibility of always seeing each other as a whole and before an immense sky. So I like this Rilke. I think it's very sweet. And I think that Rilke is kind of like struggling even within this paragraph with a lot of this tension that we're talking about, right? Like you're in a partnership, which sounds like you're one, but also the best way to be in a partnership is to recognize that you're two separate beings. And actually by recognizing you're two separate beings, that there's like no way for you to truly bond as one, you'll be able to grow closer. And I think that Rilke encapsulates that really well. And that this debate in the Gemara, as much as there are opinions, the beauty of Gemara and of oral law is that we preserve multiple opinions even when one isn't followed out in practice, because there's a beauty in seeing that multiplicity of opinion and seeing that back and forth, and kind of like seeing this back and forth, this give and take that we just saw in this paragraph is the whole nature of oral law. When we see debates, that this is about the preservation of these kinds of larger discussions that often aren't black and white, but are living in a sense of duality, in a sense of back and forthness. And that's the beauty, I think, of learning oral law in addition to written law, to Torah, that we can kind of get more of a glimpse of the potential muddiness, but hopefully also the plurality of like opinions and colors that exist behind the text in these debates that rabbis have had throughout the centuries. So that is going to wrap up our class for today. This was a very technical, rigorous piece of learning. It will not always be like this. I already can tell you a quick preview for next week. For Parsha, no, we're going to be talking about the Tower of Babel and the nature of what exactly that tower was. And that's probably going to be a little bit more of a literary understanding. So if some of that kind of went over your head, do not be worried about that. Hopefully you also saw in the nature of the rigorous back and forth, there's these larger philosophical discussions happening. And hopefully that can be something that is accessible to you and helpful to you in thinking about like, what is the nature, it won't always also be like the nature of humanity and, you know, what is our place in this world. That's also like pretty intense, pretty metal for the first time. But you know, the Bereshit starts off with these big questions. That is the beginning of the Torah. So I hope that as much as maybe it was like a little bit of a difficult ride that way, that a lot of interesting points were brought up, even points that maybe were difficult to be reckoning with. But I think also us engaging with them and even disagreeing with them is the nature of the greater Talmudic project, Jewish project, rabbinic project. And hopefully now by being in a class like this, you can see yourselves as part of it. This is exactly what the rabbis have been doing for thousands of years. So on that note, technically the class will be over. If anyone has any questions or wants to stick around for a bit, I'll be here. And thank you so much for coming and choosing to learn Torah on a weeknight. That's it's very brave of you.
It's really good.
Thank you.
Shkoyach, great job.
Amazing. Thank you. Someone asked for my contact info. I will put it in the chat. My full name, Sofia Freudenstein, very long name. You can reach me at my email through Maharat, which is my first initial, and then my last name at yeshivatmaharat.org. I put it here. It's also on the source sheet at the top in case you lose it in the Zoom. And yeah, feel free to stick around and ask questions. And if not, have a good night. And thank you so much for being here.
Pronounce your last name again, please.
Freudenstein.
Freudenstein. Good. Good, good, good. Do you have a title? Or should be
Not
addressed
yet.
as
I'm still a student.
Okay,
So I have
Okay.
time.
okay.
Technically Maharat intern according to ASBI.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, Sophie. That was great.
Thank you.
It's a
Thanks,
great concept
Lana.
for a class.
See you next
Yeah.
time.
Thanks for sticking with it, Lana. I know it's
Thank
rough.
you.
Wasn't at all.
Good job, Alana. Good job.
Next
Alana.
time we
Is it-
can talk about gender essentialism.
Yeah, we didn't even go there. It was lurking in the background. Exactly.
Well done.
Amazing.
Well
Good
done.
night.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.